is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative and creative individuals who are helping to shape the future of the American West. I meet these people through my work in ranch brokerage and land conservation, or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, pretty much anyone who's doing important work and has an interesting story to tell. My guest today is Stephen Smith. Stephen is an agrarian and adventure photographer who has successfully combined his love of ranches, farms, motorcycles, and travel into a full-time career in professional photography. Thanks to a combination of his artistic eye, a lot of hard work, persistence, and a willingness to take risks, Stephen has successfully created a niche for himself in the crowded arena of professional photography. He's obviously a naturally talented artist, but it seems to me that a great deal of Stephen's success can be traced back to the fact that he's completely committed to putting himself in unique and often difficult, uncomfortable, or scary situations that allow him to capture one-of-a-kind experiences and perspectives. Among other things, he's worked on a 90,000-acre cattle ranch in Colorado. He took a 5-month solo motorcycle trip through South America, and he's put in time at several California and Colorado vineyards, all while constantly shooting photos and refining his craft. Stephen's solid understanding of agriculture and years of adventure travel are evident in his work. His images are as authentic as they are artistic, and he knows how to capture the true spirit of a person, place, animal, or experience in a fresh style that creates a genuine connection with the audience. I came across Stephen's agricultural photography several years ago and was immediately drawn in. And keep in mind, I can be a bit jaded when it comes to ranch photos. I look at them all day as part of my job. But there's something about Stephen's work that's unique and compelling, and I'm a huge fan of all of it. I was super excited to finally meet Stephen and learn more about his work and personal story. We had a fun and oftentimes hilarious conversation that covered a wide range of interesting topics. We dug into his connection to agriculture and talked in depth about how ranches and farms can play an important role in land conservation. We talked about motorcycles and learned about some of his adventures around the world and throughout the American West, including a few recommendations of best rides in the American West. We discussed the importance of international travel and lessons that we've both learned from immersion in foreign cultures. We obviously chatted in great detail about his photography, and he also told an absolutely ridiculous story about a bear chasing him and some of his buddies through a scree field in the Front Range of Colorado. It's ridiculous. You need to hear it. I had a really fun time recording this episode with Stephen. He's a cool guy, and he's able to combine thoughtful, in-depth conversation with some really crazy and funny, hilarious adventure stories. So he's really the perfect guest for this podcast. I think you'll get a lot out of it. If you haven't already, go to his Instagram page. Just type in I am Stephen Smith, and that's Stephen with a PH. I am Stephen Smith. And look him up. You'll really enjoy his work. If you're a fan of anything in the American West, ranching, adventure, mountains, rivers, he's your man. So check it out. I'll have links to Stephen's Instagram and his website and any other interesting info in the episode notes. So be sure to go to the webpage and check that out. But in the meantime, hope you enjoy this episode. Thanks a lot. Well, the first question I've been asking folks with these interviews is, if you and I were to meet for the first time and I ask you what you do for a living, how do you describe your work?
Yeah, right now, I'm an agrarian lifestyle and adventure travel photographer with a little bit. I offer some creative strategy consulting for clients that I engage in on a more complex level. But yeah, trying to live the dream as a photographer right now.
Yeah, well, it looks like you're doing a good job with it, because I just randomly came across your work probably a few years ago. As you know, we talked about that, and I came across some of your ranch work, and it seemed to coincide with exactly what I'm doing, and so I was following you, and then it turned out we had a mutual friend, and so I mustered up the courage to reach out to you, and you were nice enough to talk with me on this. So again, I appreciate that. So how did you get into that? I mean, I guess we need to break it down. You got the agriculture side, you've got the adventure travel, you got motorcycles. On the agricultural side, how did you break into that or decide to focus on that?
Yeah. I grew up in North Carolina also, and my mom's parents had this really cool farm that backed up to the Yadkin River. And I think that having rural North Carolina roots, there was always that, oh, this is from the garden, that would happen at the dinner table, which is an amazing privilege. But it was just printed in my mind, being in rural areas, having space, being connected directly to nature, being barefoot, eating out of the garden was just impactful on the deepest level, deeper than I realized until later in life. After, I guess, the turning point was a motorcycle trip in South America. I'd saved up a bunch of money and went down there and rode, and I ended up in Mendoza, Argentina, and got really fascinated with viticulture, the growing of grapes. And I'd managed a bar and knew about selling and serving, but I just was fascinated with the growing side. And that led me to Napa, where I lived with and worked with as an apprentice. Very, very much an old world style educational and work experience. But this guy, David Mahaffey, he makes Olivia Brion wine. It's organic Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Cab. And I guess my eyes were open to, not feeling like I had to do or be one thing. I mean, the guy, shot photos for Polaroid in the 70s and hung out with Warhol and is a master woodworker and rides motorcycles and makes wine, and just totally we jammed, and he's inspired me in so many ways. And, their backyard, him and his wife, it's just, instead of ornamental plants, it is, by default, a model of permaculture. So he's got fruiting plants and chickens and vegetables just everywhere. And I got tapped into that lifestyle, that agricultural lifestyle that California, can offer so many people. And so my perspective, there was a big shift from the connection to the natural world in the sense of recreation, which is still very important in my life. But in addition to that, I started to think about the shifts in weather, the climate, the landscape, as far as is how that connected to growing and producing. So that was a pivotal point for me, going and learning how to make wine with him. And, from there it led into a bunch of other stuff, and I've continued to integrate that into whatever I do.
So were you taking photos the whole time? I mean, like when you left for your South American motorcycle trip, which I want to hear more about, but how long have you been taking photos seriously?
Yeah, I think I got my first film camera when I was in middle school.
Oh, wow.
And I learned how to take photographs in high school in the photo class with my mom's camera that she had in college that was given to her by my grandfather, an old Canon TX, and I still have the Canon TX. It is, I've been taking pictures for most of my life, and I've always loved it. I love the idea of composition. I love the idea of documenting and storytelling. And, when I went to college at the University of Colorado, there was kind of this whole, studying art isn't practical, right?
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough to have parents that, they wanted me to do what I was passionate about, and they helped kind of guide and support me through that. But after 6 months in a liberal arts school without art classes, I just felt like something was missing. So I immediately declared art as a major and focused on sculpture because of my desire and fascination with materials and 3D objects. And construction, and then photography because of just that lifelong passion. And yeah, to answer your question, I was photographing everything the whole time. So, I got out of school and I was a little burnout, and I said, digital was coming on and film was kind of in question among some people, in the professional realm. And I was like, I'm not doing this. I don't want to be a photographer. And then I didn't realize that it was only going to get harder and more competitive later in life. But the whole time I was working with David as a viticulture and winemaking intern, I was taking pictures. I started a blog. I photographed the whole trip through South America, which still is like some of my favorite work and moving and has been foundational, but with no expectations of ever making a living from it. Like, how could I ever be an actual professional photographer? It just seems so foreign. But through the course of working with David, other winemakers, as a ranch hand on a big ranch, and in distillation, I was providing marketing material for those companies, and also building a pretty big portfolio.
Yeah.
So yes, to answer your question.
Are there any lessons you learned by starting with film? Like say you were starting right now, there wouldn't even be an option to start with film. Are there any lessons you learned by having to go through kind of the slow drudgery of film work that you think have given you a big advantage overall?
Absolutely. I mean, I think about when my dad taught me how to drive a vehicle, it was a manual first. Actually, it came after learning how to ride a dirt bike manually because of I think his desire for me to understand how each gear connects to, interacts with the clutch and the gas and all of those things. And I think that's a very relevant analogy for the way that, the shutter speed, the aperture, and the film speed, the ISO, interact. And I think I think for me, I only shoot manual on my settings on my digital camera just because that's what I'm used to, and I love complete control.
Yep.
And I think that gives me an advantage because I understand the technical side. I mean, I can only imagine some kid that's 16 right now and their first car is a Prius. Jesus, I mean, it's just an electric spaceship compared to learning on the old Toyota pickup that I learned. So I think it has given me an advantage in my shooting because it's just a technical foundation that it's still, even the digital cameras are modeled after those systems,
Yeah, I don't do photography even close to anything on your level, but I do a lot of it through my work. And when I was in college, I took a photography class during summer school one year, and it was definitely my favorite class of college. But we learned on the the old school film cameras, and those lessons I learned there, I still use them today. Even with the fanciest digital camera, and even with the iPhone, sometimes it just gives you a base level of knowledge that most people don't have, I feel like. So you mentioned that you worked on a ranch. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. So, coming from winemaking, viticulture, some sales, working for a distillery that was a Peak Spirits is out in Western Colorado, Jackrabbit Hill Farm, really progressive place that I also found on a motorcycle trip. So there's this connection that keeps going with my transition in my jobs. But I was interested in learning more about animal husbandry and large-scale land management. And, I think that experience, in Colorado working on the ranch just kind of scratched the surface. But, I just wanted to go. And I was also, from a cultural standpoint, really fascinated with learning more about the American cowboy. Mm-hmm. And I think that from a cultural standpoint, it's permeated everything from Hollywood to, button-down shirts at Urban Outfitters, right? So it's iconic throughout the world. And living in Colorado, a place where, oftentimes there are, say for example, restaurants or business concepts tend to be inspired by other regions. It's a relatively young country in the world and a young state for sure. So I was interested in exploring what I consider cultural terroir. I mean, what is the real root of this region, and how can I understand this place beyond taking ideas from California or New York? So that was another part of it. How can I dig into this? I didn't know how to ride a horse.
Yeah.
And they didn't really teach me. I just kind of figured it out. But I was running. We were on 90,000 acres, and
where was it again?
In between Pueblo and Colorado Springs. It's a state land board land called Chico Basin Ranch.
Oh, yeah. I know that place. That's a great place.
Yeah. And so anyway, I was there for about 6 months. I was doing some business development actually for them on the side. I threw a concert with Steve Earle. That was a pretty interesting experience, and set up some website stuff for them. But then 3 days of the week I was riding. We would get up at 3 or 4 and ride for 2 hours, collect 500 head and move them into another pasture and ride back. And that was a 12-hour day doing one move. So, you learn how to ride a horse pretty quickly, or you get out, sink or swim, which I love.
Were there any people there that started when you did that you saw quit? I bet so.
Well, there were not exactly the same time, but there was one or two folks, a bit younger and just exploring different things. But it didn't quite last. And absolutely some of the hardest physical labor I've ever done, which is great because to me it was kind of like, cool, can I do this? It turns out I can, and it's very much things I'm going to integrate into to future projects that I have percolating. But and I learned about very, like I said, very basically, it was just a 6-month thing, but how grazing techniques, can really help to restore the land. And just last weekend, I was shooting down at White Oak Pastures in Georgia with the Savory Institute video team, or some folks that are producing a video. And it just continues to snowball. You put yourself around these people, and there's just so much to learn about how we can help heal the soil and how to manage land while still providing food. And obviously, as well as anyone, it's an expansive subject that we could probably spend the whole time just talking about that.
Yeah, well, I'd love to get your thoughts on it a little bit. For people who don't know about the Savory Institute and don't really know about the holistic range management, can you just give kind of a quick overview of what that means to you, and just to give people a base level of knowledge?
Sure, and obviously, I'm not a technical professional here, but it's not rocket science. Some of the basic concepts, which is why I think they're so important. But being from North Carolina or even the Southeast, as an example, you have some of these crops that have been grown for a long, long time, but not until right around after World War II, to my understanding, when there's a big surplus of nitrogen, right, that was going into some of these bombs. So then people started thinking of how they could quantify this surplus, and they started making fertilizers, and the whole concept of the factory farm, the industrialization of producing food came into play. Well, they're pumping the soil full of steroids, basically, and not looking at a holistic system. And nature is holistic, and a monoculture is not natural. Mm-hmm. So what I'm seeing in my early stage research and exposure to some of these holistic practices is how can we use animals in a responsible way to help regenerate the soil, build the structure, the nutrients, and get it back on track, while at the same time producing healthy, nutritious animal protein and food for humans to eat.
Yep.
So it's just a beautiful concept, and I'm excited to continue to learn more about it.
Yeah, it really is. It's pretty amazing. And I started selling ranches in 2005, but it was a few years after that I really started learning about this, and it changed my entire perspective on grasslands and the importance of grasslands, and all that kind of stuff here, especially in the West, where there's just so little rainfall. And I think for people who want to learn more about that, there's a book by a guy named Jim Howell, and it's called For the Love of Land. And it goes into all the details on that, and it's awesome. And I also had Jim Howell on this podcast, so if you go to the page, you can look that up. And he's an extremely interesting guy too.
I love that podcast. I thought it was fantastic. In fact, I sent it to a bunch of my friends, and I appreciate you doing that. It was very educational.
Oh yeah, well he's just a really cool guy. I mean, he's obviously from the grazing side of things. He knows his stuff, and he's got this really neat profession, and he's one of the top guys in his field. But then on top of that, after he finishes, busting his ass on the pasture all day, he goes and runs ultra marathons. So he's a cool
so
guy.
Amazing.
One of the things that I talk about a lot on this podcast, and is just an interest of mine, is land conservation, mainly land conservation in the West. And one of the things that always comes up when I'm talking about conservation, especially to people from back east, you say the word conservation, and it seems that it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. It can mean anything from saving the whales to saving the rainforest to saving a ranch. And so I like asking people like you, who are kind of involved in different aspects of the West, what does conservation mean to you?
Well, I think that to kind of start before answering that there's no going back to what it was, right? Our impact is growing, the population is growing, and I think really from now forward we just have to think about what is the best way to preserve some of these natural systems that are still very functional. How can we look at using savory techniques as an example, ways to positively affect and regenerate the land. So conservation to me really is being aware of these natural systems, these places, and doing the best we can to minimize negative human or animal impact.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I think I think people on the extremes, some people who say no people at all, nothing, right. the most kind of militant type environmentalists, I think they serve a purpose because they balance out the other end of the spectrum, which is, corporate farming or big corporations that are destroying the environment. And so the answer, I agree with you, is somewhere there in the middle. And from everything I've seen, the way the Savory Group and just holistic range management in general, the way they do it seems to take into account both sides of the equation, and it seems to be a good compromise that works.
Yeah, I think that in any situation in life, I think it's important to have the extremes, but it's also important to have the perspective to hear both sides and to find a place that's somewhat in the middle and being realistic. I of course don't support dirt bike riders riding off trail and creating erosion and things like that. But I also know that at this point there's some pastures or some parts of property that are covered in invasive species, and with proper management can actually be brought back to a more healthy balance. So I think that's what it is balance.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing for people who aren't familiar with the Savory Institute, just to make clear that I think a lot of people don't seem to understand, is that these grasses, especially out here in the West, they evolved over tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, maybe millions of years, to be eaten. That's part of their system of growing and thriving. Is a herd of animals comes, eats them, then moves on, and then it regenerates. And since there are no large scale herds of animals roaming the West anymore, that can be mimicked with responsible grazing of cows or goats or even bison. And listen to the Jim Howell podcast if you want to dig into it, because he digs deep. But so you've obviously got a really, really good understanding of a wide range of agriculture. How has that helped you with your photography and allowed you to have kind of a different perspective? Because I would imagine that there are a lot of photographers who think that they know how to photograph agricultural operations or ranches or farms. But what do you think this huge amount of experience you have actually in the trenches of agriculture, how has that helped you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, when I came out of school, I was a little intimidated and burnt out. And then, what would that be? 11 years after graduating, I realized, wow, I love photographing the things that I've actually done. And this could be a really unique perspective and sales angle, because if I'm on the back of the horse and we're photographing a cattle move, A, I can ride, and B, I can drop the camera and cut to the left and get that calf back in line because I know it's going to the watering hole. So understanding the shorthand of the talk, if I'm photographing a vineyard, I know that veraison's happening a little early in Napa right now, so maybe I'll go up, and that's not common based on my background. It's a warm year, early bud break. So I think it's amazing to think about if you're an emerging photographer, right? It's so, like I said, it's so crowded, it's so difficult, but find your passion, live that, and then maybe that's your angle on how you shoot. It's easy for people to romanticize subjects, and we all photograph things that we don't know a lot about, and that's natural. But photographing something that you're deeply passionate about and you have personal experience with on the other side of the camera, or just working it, I think gives you an edge and gives you a very unique perspective into a deeper understanding of your subjects.
Yeah, and from kind of an unbiased third party, I would say that your knowledge of the agricultural world probably builds trust, especially with the people working on the properties, and they can tell that you're not some fancy guy who comes in there with all his fancy camera equipment. Like, I'm sure that they probably have a preconceived notion about professional photographers. And when you come in there and you can speak their language and you can work your ass off all day and keep up with them, I'm sure they can let down their guard, and that leads to better photos in the end, I would guess. Is that right?
Yeah. It's funny because, I think when I'm in Los Angeles, my friends kind of joke, you're kind of a hick. And
So thank you very much.
Exactly. I say, you know what, that's the sweetest thing anyone's ever said. And because, those are my roots, and there's no getting around that. That's the reality. We never went to a city growing up. We always went to the woods if we had time off or vacation. And I couldn't be more grateful for being taught how to start a fire and set up a shelter and on and how to grow tomatoes. But when I'm in rural Georgia and someone says, "Oh, he's here from Los Angeles," I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah.
here we go," and it's like, "Oh, city slicker." And then it's not about proving anything, but then it comes out in the wash. They realize, oh, okay, well, he's put his time in this and he's passionate about it, so we're cool. But so there's that funny thing. It's all relative to where you are and how you're perceived. But I do think that there's a sense of acceptance and credibility based on working 10 years or so in farm and ranching.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of kind of unique or extraordinary agricultural operations that you've worked with in the past? And it could be in the West, it could be in the East, just places that you've had the pleasure of photographing that stick out in your mind as a good way of doing business?
Absolutely, and they're very fresh. I'll start with where I was literally last weekend, which was at White Oak Pastures in Bluffton, Georgia. And Will Harris is kind of the head herdsman, as he calls it, and he's, I want to say 6th or 8th generation. I don't want to mess that up, but his family's been in the area for a long, long time. And he has had the confidence and the vision to drop all of the conventional, the herbicides, the pesticides in their veggie stuff, the hormones. He's dropped all that stuff in the last 30 years, and he's got solar. It's almost zero waste. I mean, their hides get tanned, and what they don't use for leather, they're using to make dog treats, and then all of the animal scraps go into this composting pile. Of course, it's just a full closed loop system. He's got maybe 12 or 13 different species all roaming the pastures together. And at the end of the day, it tastes really good, right? Their product is really good. And they're working alongside Epic Bar, which is one of my clients, and they're just doing great things. And in an area that, it's like, why rock the boat, right? If you're growing the trifecta they call down there, if you're growing corn, cotton or peanuts, and you're just pumping all those chemical fertilizers and nitrogen and whatnot into the soil, and you're making a profit, why change it, right? Well, the trick, and what I just applaud him by, is a couple things. But one, what seems to be financially viable is his model, right? So not only is he healing the land. I mean, I was in a cotton field and just like dusty, sandy soil, and he just acquired it, and he's got goats in there, and they're trimming down the leaves, right? So this is a broadleaf plant that they're trimming down. The hooves are aerating in a way. Yep. They're dropping, feces, urine, so they're putting nitrogen in the soil. Then they're dropping seed, grass seed on. So, and then because they're eating the leaves, they're pulling the shade off, right? So that the sun can then get down to these new seeds. It's just a beautiful model. So this is a long-term regeneration, but they're working on it. Not only that, this town, I think, has a population of like 100 people. He's got 130 employees. So not to say they're all his employees, but these little villages, these towns in rural Southeast and other parts of the country that were booming back in the day, right? Yep. Booming before industrial agriculture, because that's what they did there. And they've kind of decayed, and it's really sad, especially if you're from the region and you go these beautiful old structures and homes and you imagine what it was like, in the early 1900s, and then all the business left because of the industrialization of it. Well, he is using this as a model to bring in industry and support communities, and so that was a very inspiring visit. And then another property that I thought was just fantastic, and I worked with them at some point, but still, I keep in touch, and I've got a lot of respect for Jackrabbit Hill Farm out in Hotchkiss, Colorado. Mm-hmm. And I stumbled across them on a motorcycle trip and just kind of let myself in, which at first, the owner was just not happy about. I guess I just didn't read the sign. But it was meant to be, because, within 30 minutes, he's like, how the hell do you know about keg wine? How do you know about biodynamics? And I said, why are you out here? They're 6 hours from Denver, and they're making traditional European eau de vie, which is a dry brandy, natural fermentation, organic fruit from this amazing microclimate, biodynamic farm, first one in Colorado, first organic distillery in the United States, and I just found this needle in a haystack.
That's cool.
And they got a James Beard nomination. They're winning they won the Good Food Awards one year. I'm sure they've had other awards since. But it's just people that I think have conviction and believe in, creating these amazing programs, these closed loop systems that are regenerating the land, that are low input, off farm input, and producing on top of that. Like, it's great to have that concept, but at the end of the day, you have to make really good wine, or you have to make really good beef to make it viable. Those are two examples of farms and ranches that are really inspiring, that I think are successful in those things.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a really good point that I forgot to mention earlier. It's fun to talk about all the feel good environmental parts of it, but at the end of the day, these people, they make more money doing it this way, and they make these properties more productive than they would be otherwise, and they make them more sustainable. And so it's worth noting that this is a financially viable model, and they create jobs. They make more money. It's not just a feel good, do it out of the goodness of your heart and sacrifice. It's do this. It's better for the land. It's better for your bank account, which I think is amazing.
Yeah, it's got to be that way for people to see. And hopefully it's an exponential thing, and it catches on, and it does prove to be viable in more places.
Yeah, because somebody's got to go first. Like you were saying, a lot of these farmers and ranchers, they're working as hard as they possibly can to stay in the black. And the idea of taking some big risk, that's not viable for most people if you have families and a mortgage and all that kind of stuff. And so luckily there are a few of these folks out there who are willing to take the risk and show that it can be done that way, which will hopefully open the door for other people. You keep talking about motorcycles, which I think is really cool. So tell me, how old were you when you started riding motorcycles?
Well, let me say first, I'm having a really good day. I just got the cover of the fall edition of the Overland Journal, so my photo is going to be on the cover. And if you haven't seen the Overland Journal, it's a beautiful periodical that's in print.
That's a big deal, man.
Yeah, I'm having a good day. I'm not kidding. It's great to talk to you. I've got another winery client, and then this cover. It's like, anyway, I'm happy and I'm very grateful. So that's a bit of that's news and kind of a buzz for me today. But
I'll put links to all this on the webpage for the podcast. Cool. So I have a link to that cover so people can see it.
Amazing. Yeah. So my dad, I grew up in rural North Carolina, he did rather, and he was riding. I just remember hearing stories about this old Bull Taco, the old Spanish dirt bike that he had back in high school, riding around the woods behind my grandparents' house. So, geez, I can't even remember from an early age. Well, I grew up riding bicycles with him, and just remember hearing about this, seeing these old bikes, and just that buzz of the adrenaline and the speed and the sound of the bikes was, just a lifelong thing. And I think I was in middle school and I got access to a buddy's KX80, which was a little two-stroke Kawasaki dirt bike, and that's where I learned. And that was the hook, man. Once you hit that power band on a two-stroke and you're just a little kid, oh man, the smile just stretches around your head and it's just on. So, I eventually got a Suzuki dirt bike, and Dad and I would ride, and it was a different way to bond. And I don't know, it's like I saw him as a friend, not just a dad. And it was kind of like the first time that it clicked over in that way.
And how old were you then?
High school.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, and so it was like, oh, you're actually pretty cool because you're not in dad mode. But he's a great dad, but it was like something unlocked where we were just bros riding.
Sure.
and then when I was 16, we both took the safety course for the street together. And so he got an old BMW, and I don't know how my parents were cool enough to let me into it at that age and trust me. But every now and again I could sneak his bike off, and I'd ride it to school in high school, and everyone thought my parents were so bad. But it's changed my life in so many positive ways, and I've been riding ever since then. I've had a couple different BMWs, and at one point I could afford a Ducati when I was living here the first time, and that was just a good buzz. But I've I don't know. It's like you see the world in a different way. You can smell the honeysuckle when you come around the corner. You can feel the temperature drop when you come into a riverbed. It's full immersion into an environment, and you're vulnerable. The rain comes, you got to figure out if you're going to deal with it or go under a culvert or a bridge. Or it's just my absolute favorite way to experience a landscape and a culture.
Yeah, I agree with you. The thing you said about driving and being able to smell things and being able to tell the difference in temperatures. That is and I'm not at all an experienced rider. I mean, I mess around with it a little bit, but I clearly remember one of the first times I was riding around on one, and I didn't start doing it till I was in my late 20s. But you cruising and you go down a little hill, and it's so much colder at the bottom of the hill than it was up top, and it's just the neatest. You're completely in the moment. It's a feeling like none other. Go ahead.
Well, it ties into agriculture, because the first time I was on a vineyard that had a kind of a convex kind of slope to it, so it kind of bulged out as it dropped down. Mm-hmm. And there were certain plants that, there were certain rows that were at the bottom that in this particular region in Sonoma were collecting all the cold air, right? So they had issues with certain grapes, certain rows not ripening at the same rate as the ones above because of the way the air settled.
Wow.
So I know it seems so different, such a unconnected, unrelated way of relating to the natural world from farming to like motorcycles or exploring, but it's a pretty cool way of immersing and looking for those connections.
Yeah, it's in the end, it's just connecting in different ways. It's just different ways of kind of seeing things beyond just the surface level, I think. So this trip you did to South America, can you give me the rundown on that? I spent some time in Mendoza right after college, and I thought it was one of the coolest places I've ever been.
Yeah, that's the exactly the place where I had that switch to winemaking and led me down this ag path. But okay, so I'm in Los Angeles. I'm managing a bar during 2008, 2009 when the bottom fell out in that recession, and I found myself in a pretty profitable position because people drink when they're upset and when they're happy.
That's right.
So I was getting fed up with Los Angeles and just had this dream for so long to explore South America. It just seemed like a more rustic, expansive version of the American West, and it very much is. And I saved money, and I told my boss and everyone I was quitting at the end of the year, and they said, yeah, cool. Yeah, okay. No problem. And then it came in time, and I said, I got 4 weeks left. And they're like, yeah, okay, cool. And then I said, tomorrow's my last day. And they're like, wait, you're really doing it? I said, yeah, I've been planning this shit for 6 months.
I told you.
It's on. Yeah, I've been saving for a year and a half. And so anyway, it was kind of a crazy story. This was before Instagram or this amazing, maybe overly connected culture we have now. But, I got access to the Hub and Horizons Unlimited and ADV Rider, and tracked down this Kiwi lady who had a DR650 that she had ridden from Alaska to Ushuaia, which is the southernmost point. So a lot of respect for her for doing that. And it was in my budget to buy this old bike, take down some parts, and rebuild it because it's a tank.
Yeah.
Well, I gave her a deposit, and I got on the plane. She crashed 200K from the bottom, from the finish, after riding for a year, and she was in a coma. Ooh. And it was really sad. She ruined the bike. So she came out and was recovering, thank goodness. But I had to act quickly, and I found a bike, a Suzuki V-Strom 650, did some shady paperwork, but I kept the dream alive, paid the guy, and I got on my way. And it was 5 months of riding alone with whatever I could fit on the bike. And I went from Buenos Aires over to Cordoba, through the mountains, out to Mendoza, down through Chile. And I got to Chile right after the earthquake in 2010.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It was really a wild time. And I couldn't spend much time there. I was trying to volunteer, but they didn't have any infrastructure set up yet. It was just really like the week after.
My cousin actually lived there when that happened. Where's the place on the coast that has it has really, really good surfing, like big wave kind of surfing?
I want to say Valparaiso,
is that
another place? I mean, the heart of it was Concepcion, which was, I think, the epicenter of the earthquake.
Yeah.
But there's a town that's northwest of Santiago that's supposed to be a beautiful beach town that has good surfing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm blanking on it. But yeah, so, I got exposed to the winemaking. I was just riding down Route 40 and just seeing the most expansive ranches and gaucho, riding down the road, and I wave at them on the bike. It was just, it opened my heart and my mind, and I had nothing but positive, welcoming experiences with everyone in Argentina, Chile, Brazil especially, and then a brief stint through Uruguay. But I crossed back from Santiago through Argentina, which is a big country,
mm-hmm.
To Foz do Iguaçu, which is on the border of Brazil, Argentina, and Paraguay,
mm-hmm.
or Uruguay. And then I made my way up to Rio. So this was crazy. I mean, I was living on the cheap, trying to just eat local food, camp if I felt it was safe. Otherwise, I'd stay in a little hotel. And I didn't mean to stay in Rio for more than 2 days, and I stayed there 2 weeks.
That's so cool.
And it was such a privilege and an amazing opportunity to say yes, to be open and trusting of people. And to, the motorcycle culture down there is really cool. So in Brazil, I would be at a gas station. I remember I was in one town, I want to say outside Curitiba, which is kind of a highland town that's inland in Brazil. And I was just at the gas station, and I look like a guy from space with California plates and full kit. And this guy said, I ride motorcycles, and we have a club here, and hey, we're going to a fish fry, and you want to come? And sure. I mean, I don't have anything else to do. It's Sunday. I ended up staying with him and his family for 2 days and dancing and going to the barbecue and riding with the guys. And it was unbelievable. So that was a life-changing experience. And, I came back and I went over budget. So I came back and worked on paying off debt and learning how to make wine. So
how would you say that you were different when you got back than when you left? I mean, I'm sure you could write a book about it, but I lived internationally for a year when I was 31, and I found it to be one of the most formative experiences of my life, even at that age. So if you could summarize it, how were you different when you got back?
I just remember being so open and so warm and so just kind of happy with less. I mean,
that's the same feeling I had.
Yeah, really? Where were you when
we were in Costa Rica, and my wife had a job there, and we went down there for a year, and we had just gotten married, and you know how it is in North Carolina. When you get married, you get about a tractor trailer load worth of wedding gifts. And when we lived in Costa Rica, we had 3 spoons, 3 knives, 3 bowls. She was working at a bilingual school there, and then when we came back to the U.S., all our wedding gifts were waiting for us. And I was like, at one point, we had 135 glasses.
Wow. It must have seemed like a tidal wave, right?
It's overwhelming. And you go to the grocery store, and there's an entire aisle of nothing but bottled water. And Costa Rica is by no means a rough place to be, but it is a developing nation. And so that was the same feeling I had, that you don't need all this junk.
I think we're in a really strange time, and I'm trying to do some personal work addressing this right now. But in the U.S., we have too many options, and not to get too personal, but whether it's dating apps, right? That's more mainstream now, which you got to cut that out, yep. or too many IPAs at the bar. I mean, these are first world problems, and it's a privilege, and I'm not by any means want to sound ungrateful, but I'll tell you, when you go into a bar and you say, I want a cold beer, and they give you one and you drink it and it's awesome, mm-hmm. It's fine.
Yes.
Because then you're focusing on your company, on your book, and you're not sitting here thinking about which artisanal cocktail has the it's too much, right?
I completely agree.
So that was it, man. I came back and I just wanted to dance and connect with people and keep it simple. And I was so happy. And I think the goal with any of us that are lucky enough to be able to travel the world is when you come back, or even when I went backpacking over the 4th of July with some friends on the way back down, I said, hey, okay, what can we list out? 3 things that we felt or we saw or we remember that we can integrate and keep in this life back in the world of connectivity and obligation or duty, whatever. So it was definitely formative for me and life changing, and I don't think I'll forget that feeling of coming back.
It's hard. I think, at least for me, it's hard to keep that in the front of your mind because you just kind of get overwhelmed with how things are in the U.S., which is great. I'm not complaining about the U.S., but you kind of keeping things simple. You're swimming upstream to keep things simple the way the culture is set up. And I think it's very evident with little kids, because when I was there, I did a lot of volunteer work with in this little village. And I remember after Christmas, there was a little family, and they had like 5 kids. And I think between the 5 of them, they got a soccer ball. And they were just unbelievably happy, and it was the greatest thing in the world. The whole town's out there playing with this new soccer ball. And then you see kids in the U.S. at Christmas, and they've got about a ton of gifts, all this plastic junk, just overwhelming, and they're kind of cross-eyed because they've got all these presents. They can't even open them fast enough. And I think that simplicity, I think, is a lot better for everybody. Not to get all preachy or anything.
No, I mean that's exactly what I pulled out of it, and that's why I try to go to rural places like Mexico and or wherever I can get, and just trim out, because I think that we're on a path with too much information. I mean, we're just humans, we're just animals. I just don't
fancy monkeys. That's what I thought.
I just don't think we can handle all this stuff, and there's a reason why there's so much anxiety and depression. You're comparing yourself to 1.5 million people on Instagram because you have access to all this, or you try to maintain too many relationships because you spread yourself thin. It goes on and on. So anyway.
We could continue talking about that all day, but
yeah, indeed.
So this is kind of a random question, but have you read any good books about motorcycle adventures? I've never found a good one. I'm not. If you haven't, that's fine, because I read a ton, and I've never found a really good motorcycle adventure book.
Yeah, you'd be a better guy to find one than I have. Not really specifically about motorcycle adventures. I mean, it's almost like they tend to be like technical and kind of nerd out on stuff, which is very helpful, or cheesy or something. I don't know. I haven't really found one. Yeah,
the one I read, it was the title, or one of them that I've tried out. It was called some like 2 Wheels Through Terror, or some.
I read that.
Yeah.
I read it before I went to South America, and I indirectly know that guy, and that experience is very interesting, and it's absolutely, I think, worth kind of hearing about and researching. But yeah, I mean, it's that's
not
his.
Going to win the Pulitzer Prize, right?
I think that's fair. Yeah.
One more question about motorcycles. Yeah. If you had to recommend kind of the best 2-week trip in the American West, if you had you leave from Denver, or no, say you can fly out and you can land anywhere you want and do a big loop, what would you do?
Oh man, I love riding in the West. Well, I think if you could get the climate, the timing right, I love riding through the Southwest. There's something interesting about the variation from like the 4,000, 5,000 foot elevation desert, down in Utah, to then going up and over, just for an example, like the La Salle mountain range, right? That's east of Moab and west of, Grand Junction Telluride. Mm-hmm. You're in the desert riding, dusty or tacky, depending on the weather, red sand and rock. You're riding on these crazy rock formations, and then you climb up to 7, 8, 9 plus thousand feet, and you're riding through high alpine aspens and conifers and whatnot. So I think that the diversity of the terrain, the space, the freedom to explore, the amount of public land, I would say something like, riding from Denver and doing a loop out through Utah, say a Four Corners loop, you go around the Four Corners. I mean, that hits so many interesting things for me, because obviously you get out to California and the West Coast, it gets pretty crowded.
Yeah.
So I would say doing Utah, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, that would just be that is exceptional riding.
And one other question about motorcycles. You said we're recording this now because in like a day or two you're leaving for a 10-day trip to Mexico. What are you doing down there?
Oh man, this is another reason why I'm just buzzing right now. I met a guy named Miguel who's a lawyer, and he owns Concept Racer, which is a shop down in Mexico City. They do really cool custom stuff, and he's got awesome gloves and Kevlar pants. And we met on a photo shoot I did down in Oaxaca for a Mezcal story. And I said, hey man, I'd love to just come ride, at the very least, like, can I rent a bike? Do you have an extra one? Let's just do an adventure. And that was in February. And, it's evolved into a pretty legit production, at least for me and my work, where I've got, one of my favorite photographers, automotive and adventure photographer and director, Sinway Xavier. He shoots for Overland Journal. He's a creative director there, and he's done some awesome stuff for Toyota and Land Rover and BMW. He's just freed up, and he's coming with a camera guy. So we're making a film
nice.
about a motorcycle trip from Mexico City on the new BMW Scrambler, east down into the jungle to a place called Xilitla, which, look it up, it's spelled with an X, right? It is how do I describe it? It's this psychedelic ruined castle in the jungle that was built over like 20 years in the 50s and 60s by a guy named Sir Edmund James, I believe. And he was at the time the largest collector of Dali. So, this is like Dali and MC Escher got together and had a castle or something. It is just mind-expanding. Just from the photos, I've never been there. So we're riding down – Mexico City is on a plateau, so as you drop to the east down towards the Gulf, you actually drop into canyons and into jungle at a lower elevation. So we're going to go there. We've got 4 bikes, a chase car. There's 2 ladies coming, 4, maybe 5 guys. And we're doing a story about this beautiful region, this particular location. We're going to these waterfalls called Tamul. We are then working with the tourism board of San Luis Potosi and going up to the high desert to Real de Catorce, which is a really old, I think, 14th or 15th century mining village. That it's where the Huichol tribes kind of that area kind of starts there. Where they're growing peyote, and they have amazing art and music. And we're riding there. We're stopping at some amazing missions. And so just to think that the idea of having just a casual ride and us hustling and being very persistent has turned into a 7-person video and photo production for BMW Mexico and the tourism office and some other really fantastic brands. I'm just beside myself and ready to get to work. So that starts Monday. So wish us luck.
So yeah, that'll be awesome. That'll be a huge professional challenge as well as a huge adventure at the same time, which sounds great. Where will that video be when it's all completed? I'm sure it'll be months from now, but is it for BMW?
Well, BMW Mexico, so that specific region or division of BMW Motorrad is our biggest sponsor there. So they're definitely going to have access to all of the photos and video and basically it's content that we're building for them and Concept Racer, and that's Miguel's company. So he's going to have access to it. No doubt it'll be public. And then I think the Overland Journal is interested in working with us on it to get some stuff in print. Red Wing is involved. So it's going to be great, and I'll make sure to spread the word on it because it's an exciting project. Yeah,
that's awesome. And for people listening, we'll have links to all of Stephen's social media and Instagram. And I mean, there's his website. It's really, really spectacular work, especially if you're into any of the stuff we've been talking about so far. So when you add up all these cool experiences you've had and all the hard work you've done and all these different adventures and look back, you just got this picture on the cover of a magazine, a big time magazine in your world. when you look back, is there a certain event that you see as was kind of a big break where everything started rolling for you? Or has it been, I mean, and leading up to that big break, there was definitely unbelievable amount of hard work. Or has it just been a slow, steady climb of hard work, kind of ticking it off as you go along and building on your past successes?
Yeah, I don't think that there was one particular event that was a click or a catalyst into where I am, and I still by no means have quote unquote made it. But I think this year in the spring, I started to transition away from a zone or a space where I was like, am I crazy? Mm-hmm. Why do I think I can do this? This is nuts. This is self-indulgent. This is stupid. Yeah. I need more security, right? That's what's running through your head. To maybe this spring where it was like, I kind of somehow collectively popped over a hump where I said, I'm going to do this. I can do it. Keep going. Keep networking. Keep trying. Focus. Stay on the trail. Keep your eyes on the trail and go. But I think the other thing is, in my 20s, a lot of us, and once again, this is a very privileged problem. It's like, what am I going to be? What do I want to do? How do I define my identity? And how does that connect to my working life for those of us that have to work? And, I remember my grandmother one time introduced me as the grandson that still didn't know what he wanted to do when he grew up, which I thought was kind of a jab. And and I said, no, I'll be fine. I'll figure it out, But of course that crosses your mind. It's like if you are a little ADD or at least have multiple interests, you jump around a bit. But the reality is that I always kept a thread of land and the natural world, farm and ranch, and then motorcycle travel because it's something that ran so deep in my life. And in other words, having faith that the things you're interested in and passionate about and finding a balance between leading with your heart, like really believing in your passion and then making it tangible and viable and knowing that all of the pieces of your life will click together or sew them together yourself, make them connected and create a proprietary offering, whether you're a consultant, a writer, or whatever. Don't disregard all your experiences, but rather make them into something that is connected. And I'm starting to feel, especially on a day like today, where, okay, I am crazy. Let's get that out of the way, but I'm maybe not dysfunctional crazy, or you know what I mean? So having faith and trying to really connect all of the pieces of your life to make a really unique offering and go with it.
Yeah, I think you've definitely done it. I mean, and I think anybody who's really good at what they do, they never think I've made it. They're always looking towards the next step. I'm not saying you can't enjoy it, but there's always more to be done. And so I think that's it's a great. I think the fact that you don't think you've made it is a big that says a lot about your work ethic and your ambition. So keep up the good work, man. As far as your success, I'm sure you get approached by aspiring photographers a lot who want to kind of copy or emulate your career path. Do you have a set line that you give them as far as advice? You kind of covered that in the last question, I guess.
No, I think there's a couple things at play here that I never thought about until I think there was one conversation where there was a mother, there was a couple and they said, oh, my son's 22 and he's studying at Brooks for photography and he doesn't know how to transition into the professional world and what advice would you give him? And I'm thinking, oh, geez, I've been photographing for most of my life, but I'm only 6 months into trying to do this professionally. Like, what could I actually say? Mm-hmm. And then it kind of came out just through casual conversation. Like I had mentioned earlier, I don't think I could pull this off if I hadn't lived the ranch life, hadn't lived the winery life, hadn't, sacrificed stability in a career and saved money and ridden through South America. I mean, I followed those things because I was passionate and crazy, but now photographing those things gives you an edge.
Yes.
So I think just really being true to yourself and finding what really moves you and what's important in the world, whether it's spreading the word of regenerative agriculture or maybe you're into fashion and clothing, whatever it is, but like live it, walk the walk, and then document it. I think that's really helpful if someone's able to do that. the other thing that I think, maybe I can only speak for myself, but I would like to think that this is not an uncommon thought for art students. There was no education around business development, sales, and marketing. Mm-hmm. So I worked for the director of business development for Jackrabbit Hill Farm, which, they taught me so much about communication, keeping a sales pipeline. How do I maintain these business relationships? How do I pitch to people? And those things are just paramount. I think they're really important for photographers and artists to know how to network, cold call people, stay on it, do email blasts, and market themselves from a business side. So, you can be the most amazing musician in the world, but if you're in a cabin in the middle of the woods and no one hears it, you're not going to make a living. So you got to get out there and do the business hustle alongside your creative endeavors.
I think both of those are great pieces of advice. I heard a similar piece of advice from an author that I was reading something by the other day, and he was talking about how he gets approached by people all the time who say they want to write books. I want to write a book. And that's probably similar to I want to be a professional photographer as I want to be an author. And he says, well, what have you done? Or what are you going to write about? Or what have you done? And they haven't done anything. And he said, you have to do cool stuff before you can have anything to write about, and cool stuff could equal, be an expert in your field, if it's history or sociology or whatever, or if you want to write an adventure narrative, you got to go on an adventure. And so that's right. Same. It sounds the same with your work. I mean, everything you've done, being able to capture these moments is because you've been out there putting yourself on the line, doing these adventures. And I don't think you can fake that, at least not in the long term.
Yeah. And I think also, you can't force it. I mean, I'm probably overly persistent, some would say annoying about trying to get work, but, you want to be assertive. But I knew when I got out of school and people said, well, why aren't you pursuing your art career? I don't know. I said, it'll happen, or I'll come back to it, or I don't remember what I used to say. But yeah, go live your life, build the experience. And also, you're going to have to do some stuff for free. Yep. Don't quit your day job, right? That's an expression that's true. I mean, it's kind of like you work your day job, you do your stuff on the side. Well, at some point, I was working construction in the winter in Colorado after I left the ranch, looking over business plans, trying to decide if I was going to start an agritourism retreat or what I was going to do. And then I finally said, okay, I can't be available to go on a job if it comes, if I don't quit this job, if I don't quit the construction job. Mm-hmm. So, I took on a little loan and I kind of hit the road and said, yes, I can shoot. Yes. And I did stuff for trade. I did stuff for free. And I think I'm in the zone now where I'm coming out of that and I can start, work on that. But it's an investment. Even if you start a shop, a boutique downtown somewhere, you're going to have to take out a loan to pay the rent or get your inventory in. Mm-hmm. In other words, you're not going to just become a famous photographer or writer overnight. You got to find a way to pay your dues.
Yeah.
So, and I'm still paying them. I'm still trying, of course, like I said, but I guess that model has started to work. So
I'm sure that's a great feeling, a relief.
Yeah. Like I said, getting a little bit more into the, okay, keep going zone as opposed to jump ship and turn back. So,
well, I've got some kind of quick questions that I've been asking everybody I've been talking to, and I've gotten a really wide variety of answers on these things. So I wanted to run a few of them by you, and I know you've got a lot going on with your trip coming up, so I want to be respectful of your time. But the first one is, do you have any favorite books or books that you recommend to people about the American West, or really any subject for that matter?
Well, I'm reading East of Eden slowly but surely.
You're the second person to recommend that book.
Really?
Yep.
Man, I just love reading about the West in that time period.
I haven't read it either, so I need to.
And it's classic. Like I was traveling and I was back in Colorado, and my buddy who's an author, Dan Landis, he's great. I said, "Hey, I need a quick book. I need a travel book." And he comes down and he hands me this 600-page
doorstop.
Yeah, I'm like, damn it, Dan. He's like, listen, you're gonna have to do it at some point. Lug it around, and so I just love it because it paints this very visceral picture of the Salinas Valley during the time of being settled. And I spend a lot of time, kind of just drifting off into space in my mind when I'm on these motorcycle trips, wondering what was this land like before it was invaded, by the white man from the east, or what was it like when they were settling, or going down these roads. And so that book's been really interesting recently. Kind of painting a picture in that particular part of the West, and I think that was maybe the early 1900s when that book was based.
I've heard great things about it. I need to just go ahead and read it.
Yeah, Steinbeck, man, what a guy.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any favorite documentaries?
I'm trying to think. I haven't really watched any recently.
I've got one for you, and I just talked.
Yeah, tell me.
The last guy that I had on the podcast, we were talking about it. Long Way Round. Have you seen that?
Oh, of course.
I bet you've got that on repeat.
Well, yeah, and I think Ewan McGregor and Charlie Boorman. I had that exact bike at one point, which was smashed last year, which is a crazy story. But yeah, that's cool, and that's exactly it, man. That's the kind of documentary that really fuels the fire for motorcycle travel. That one's really good.
That was unbelievable. And then there was the second one, Long Way Down, where they go through Africa. I didn't think that was as good. But
yeah, I agree.
And I just, up until that point, I always thought Ewan McGregor was just a Hollywood kind of actor guy. I mean, he's a hard ass. There's no way. There's no way to fake 5 months through Europe. I mean, people were pulling machine guns on him and stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think, he still has to, at that point I was like, you still got to learn to ride off road a little bit, but he's a good rider. And, seeing Charlie Boorman pop wheelies on an old 1150 GSA that weighs 600 pounds, a lot of respect for that guy. No doubt.
He's hardcore too. So other than all the adventures we've been talking about, what else do you have any other hobbies? We were talking about surfing a little bit before we started recording.
Yeah, absolutely. Surfing is something. I mean, anytime I can get in the water, especially if it's warm and not crowded, surfing is something I picked up right after college on my trip down to Costa Rica, actually. And
where were you? What part of Costa Rica?
Well, let's see. We started in Malpais in Santa Teresa, and we were like 23. I mean, the cool thing about that trip is I didn't have one thing that plugged into a wall. Can you imagine traveling now like that? I can't.
Yeah, no, definitely not.
I shot like 300 rolls of film. We were down there for 2 months, and our only rule was you can't leave town. We couldn't leave a town if there was good surf, right? So my buddy Justin and he owns Sycamore Brewing in North Carolina, which – have you been down there to Charlotte, to Sycamore?
No, my sister lives in Concord, so I go. I'm in that area. I'll go check it out.
He's a brother, and he makes amazing beer. But anyway, we went down there fresh out of college, and we just taught ourselves how to surf and got beat up. Oh, yeah. But, at 22, what else are you going to do? So, yeah, I try to surf as much as I can, and just the fact that it's so minimalist, especially in warm water, just shorts and a board, and you're at the mercy of nature, much like agriculture. You're really riding these pulses of energy that come out of, not to sound too hippie, actually I don't really care, but these pulses of energy that just come out of the ground, out of the ocean. It's a beautiful thing. So that's
people who don't surf, when they hear that, they think it sounds crazy, but I'm not a hippie. I'm from North Carolina. You're not a hippie. You're from North Carolina. That stuff is true. It's 100% true. You have to do it. It is truly a spiritual experience, but it takes a damn long time to get good enough at it to experience that. I haven't been asking other people this, but I'm going to ask you just because for selfish reasons. If there's one simple piece of advice that would make me a better landscape photographer, what should I do?
I think that with landscape photography, okay, let me break this down. Thinking about your horizon line is always important, right? I think people tend to, and thinking about depth of field. So there's a couple things here. So like layering, composition, and light. And this is just off the cuff, so hang with me here. But say, for example, you've got a cow in a meadow with a tree line behind it, within a mountain in the background. Yep. So you've got a foreground, a midground, and a background. So when you're looking into space or through a lens, well, we'll say when you're looking out at this vista, this landscape without a camera, you very much realize that this is 3D. Your interaction with the space is very different than how someone's going to perceive that capture in a two-dimensional form.
Yep.
So really, you got to think about how things are going to layer up flat. So, for example, when I shoot animals, livestock, anything really, I will say anything with eyes, I try to get at eye level or sometimes lower depending on the perspective. Mm-hmm. If you're going to photograph a chicken and you're standing at whatever height you are and you shoot down and you don't have a horizon line in it, you've created a flat image that's very shallow, that has a chicken in the dirt, and that's all you see on a two-dimensional in a two-dimensional frame.
Yep.
Now, if you get on your belly, which the Will Harris at White Oak was amazed that I got on my belly in the mud with the pigs, but you gotta relate to your subject in a way that gives them respect and perspective. That's how I think of it. So, get low, put that chicken up above the horizon line of the grass. Then all of a sudden you realize that this creature is special and big in its own way. So I kind of digress from my original thing about composition and move more to where the camera is. But I also think that's important to think about where you have the camera, high, low, and so forth. But, if you've got a cow, going back to that, in a meadow on the right side of the frame, and you might say it's a dark cow, and you might put them inside this kind of light colored pasture, and then you use this horizontal line of the tree line and then the mountains in the background. There's a thing called thirds, right? So you might put the tree line at the bottom third, or the cow at the bottom third. Let's say the tree line at the bottom third, and then the mountain range at the top third. You're creating an image that is digestible and approachable and aesthetically more pleasing than if you had just maybe taken a photo of the cow with no horizon line in it. Because I think people want to see expansiveness in landscapes. They want to feel an awe. They want to see this calming openness that being there really conveys. Yep. So, thinking about your composition, using thirds, trying to keep that horizon line in the frame so you get that really awesome distance. Those are some quick things. And then also lighting, right? If you're shooting in the middle of the day and the sun's banging down, you're getting harsh shadows. Mm-hmm. If you can have the restraint or the luck or the choice to shoot early and late, right, the golden hours, you're going to get such softer light, long shadows, and it's just going to be a better image typically,
That's great advice, and I will put it into use probably next week when I'm out photographing one of these ranches. And awesome. That thing about getting up early, every single time I've had the discipline to wake up before sunrise, the photos are spectacular, or they're a lot better than any of the other ones I take. So I think that's great. All right, just a few more questions. Are you good on time?
Yeah, sure.
Cool. This is going to be a good one. What's the craziest thing that's ever happened to you in the outdoors?
How much time do we have? Does outdoors mean outside of the city? Because, I think we talked about that motorcycle crash, but I could also tell you about getting chased by a bear.
Yeah, let's hear the bear.
So, oh, man. I hadn't thought about this in a while. So I was in college at CU Boulder, and two of my buddies and I, we went up to go hiking before we went to concert, Government Mule actually, which I'm sure you know of.
Oh, yeah.
So we went up above NCAR, which is the National Center for Atmospheric Research, which is up Table Mesa in South Boulder.
Yep.
And, which casual hike. We saw a talus field or scree field, whatever, and we decided to kind of hop up the rocks and kind of create a steeper hike. And we got into this really awesome boulder area. And as we were coming down, it seemed like all of the pine needles were really matted down, really heavy impact outside of this, of this cave. Mm-hmm. And then I looked down and I saw a jawbone that was clean. And I said, oh, shit, let's get out of here. And I start kind of hopping and running down this kind of ravine. And my buddy Russ behind me just yells at me. And the way he yelled, I knew something was up. He said, stop. don't move. There's a bear on the rock above you. And I looked up and, no more than 25 feet away, kind of at an angle, but up, was a black bear just staring at me. And I was way up front ahead of them.
Yeah.
So there you go, right? What do we do as humans? We fill with adrenaline and we go into what felt like ninja mode, just like full on, I'm out of here. And I just said, okay, everyone grab a stick, break the edge. We got to have a spear. And I don't know where all that came from. It came from the depths of survival.
Yeah.
And
your caveman ancestors.
And looking back, it was so cool, knowing that we made it, right? In hindsight,
oh, yeah.
I'm glad to be telling this story and with this kind of enthusiasm. But we crossed through the woods, maybe 40 feet. We got back out to that scree field, and I said, "Okay, guys, go, go, go!" And we're just, skimming the top of them, like when the football players run through the tires.
Sure,
it was
sure.
just kind of like trying to stay on top and not break a leg. We get halfway out and we start to kind of the adrenaline starts to kind of fade and our breath comes back. And then as soon as that happened, we just heard snap, 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 and just branches and sticks. And we look back and the bear was full on chasing us.
Holy
and
shit.
I have never felt that feeling again, thank goodness. But I said, it's go time. I remember saying that like some sort of cheesy movie. And we just take off. And I quickly realized that, Russ, the guy behind me, had some back issues and he was a bit slower. And the guy behind him was a little bit heavier and had a backpack. So needless to say, I felt a little bit like, oh, well, I'll be fine, and which is pretty dark, but it's just the reality.
It's survival, man.
Yeah, and I'm fast. I was gone, and I look back and I'm like, shit. Well, I'm gonna hang, right? Like I'm gonna run, but I'm gonna keep with these guys. And Kyle, the guy in the back, just threw his backpack. He threw his water bottle. He's yelling. He's just shedding weight. And I said, okay. I said, if I hear that change in his tone, I'm going back. Like what else can you do? You're not going to leave your friend. You just try. Ugh, who knows? So we take off. We get to a meadow. The bear is right on his tail, but I start to realize maybe later or whatever that it's just pushing us. And I think obviously it could have made one swipe and grabbed him, but the bear was just pushing us out, right? We were absolutely in between the cave and the bear because we didn't see any cubs with the bear. So the cubs could have been in, if there were any, in the cave. So we get out to a meadow, and I'm like, okay, cool, I can haul. Well, and the meadow's filled with boulders, so I hit the ground. I trip on one. I roll back up, and now I'm like right next to these guys. And I was like, oh, damn, you guys are real close to the bear. And we get to the trail, and then we're still running. And the trail zigzags, because Boulder has such nice trails. They've planned a nice zigzag down the ravine and up the other side. I just jump. We just jump and we're tumbling and we're rolling down the hill and we come up the other side and I'm like, Russ, I can't run, man. I'm done. He's like, I can't either. So we get up on top of the other side and we just get together like shoulder to shoulder and we have these sticks like in our hip, like creating this spike. Dude, I'm telling you, this is real. And the bear comes up and it just decided to walk up the other side, thank goodness. And it comes up and it does that kind of sniffing thing, moving its nose around. And I hear people coming from behind us. And I said, grab your dog, there's a bear. But there were like 6 people and a dog, which could have, it really helped our situation.
Sure.
So the bear just sniffs and looks at us and is like, all right, cool, that was fun. Turns around, walks away. Kyle starts throwing up, just like, just losing it.
Do you still give him a hard time about that to this day?
I haven't talked to him recently, but
Kyle, if you're listening,
yeah,
that's very embarrassing.
Yeah, well, sorry. Hopefully he isn't, because he'll send me a message like, "Hey, dude, why'd you chuck me under?" But that feeling after the adrenaline goes away and your muscles are just zapped is like you're just tingling and floating in air. And we all just got on the phone. We're like, Mom, I love you. Dad, thank you. And it was just so real, so visceral. And we were supposed to go to that show that night, and we just sat next to each other. Like literally, I think our shoulders were touching, and we didn't need to be that close.
Yeah,
we were like sitting next to each other on the couch, just like drinking lots of beer and watching movies. And I remember Russ's girlfriend was like, what's wrong with you guys? Like, aren't you going to go to the show? We're like, no, we're cool. And so every hiking trip with them after, I think Kyle carried a pistol, a 45, and Russ always had bear spray. So that stuck with us. I'll say that much.
Damn, well, that scares me because I mean that trail is literally 3 blocks from my house, or I can access that trail 3 blocks from my house. I run through there all the time, and I see bears up there a good amount. But I've always thought, they're used to people, no big deal, and I just kind of don't really pay attention. But thanks a lot. Now I'll be scared.
Yeah, it's called Bear Canyon for a reason. I think.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, my wife actually saw a bear down there about a month ago and turned around. Yeah, man, that's intense. That's a good one. That might be the best one yet.
Well, thanks. I haven't thought about that or told that in a while, but
you're good at telling it.
Well, it was all coming back to me, I mean,
yeah. If you had to pick one place in the West that is your favorite or has a special meaning for some reason, is there one place that you just absolutely love?
Wow.
I don't know the answer to it. I'm very, I can't answer that, but I ask everybody. So,
yeah, I mean, Colorado's great. It's getting real crowded, but I think that moving there at 18 and going to college there, it changed my life. I mean, it taught me about how to survive and how to be responsible in the mountains, out in the middle of nowhere. Kind of expanding on all the great stuff my family taught me in North Carolina, and I love all of the West, but I think that just being really deep in Western and Colorado is it's magical and it's very nostalgic for me. It marks a turning point in my life.
That's a good one. And then the final question of these quick questions: what do you think, in your mind, what is the biggest challenge and or opportunity facing the West in the near future?
Water.
I agree.
I mean.
I think 80% of the people I've talked to have said that.
Once again, I'm not a specialist in this, but I have chosen to situate myself temporarily in Los Angeles for what I consider a cultural diversity. Much like in the natural world, you need biodiversity, right? So I'm here for I'm around people. A guy up the street was cleaning his sidewalk with water the other day. And I got into it with him. I was like, what the hell is wrong with you? But, I realized that there's a different way to do it, and I should have backed off and had a conversation as a neighbor. But, of course, I'm trying to learn about how to use my words and whatnot. But the point is that, people turn a faucet and a spigot, and it comes out. And that's as far down the line, so to speak, that they think.
Yep.
So, I think there's a ton of people in Colorado. California is super crowded and in a crazy drought, and at least Southern California taking its water from the Rockies. It makes me really nervous, and I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I think the only hope is to go chat with the kids, right? I mean, talk to them about what it means and give people a larger scale perspective. Right, like let's get in a spaceship and step back and look at where this is coming from and what it means and how we can try to make some changes. But I fantasize about having my own property and I always think, I always talk to professionals and specialists and where's the sweet spot? Where is there a lot of snowpack and it's everyone says the Southeast, which is kind of funny because I left there, but I think that really makes me nervous is what we're going to do to continue to raise food with some crazy inconsistent weather,
Yeah, I think the water issue is going to be the big one. I think you made a good point there saying that people turn on the faucets and water comes out and that's all they think of. And I think you could say the same thing about agriculture. They go to the grocery store and they buy their hamburger meat. And they think that's where that comes from as well. So I think being able to look down the line, like you said, in any part of the environment, I think is very valuable. So if you could make a request of the people listening to this, and they're everybody from ranchers to conservationists to artists like you to writers, and then people who do kind of all that, what would your request be?
Oh, boy.
And really just people who love the American West, I'd say.
Yeah. Work together. I don't know. I mean, whether that's having a conversation, whether that's me addressing my neighbor who's not from the United States about why I think he should not use water to clean his driveway, right? Mm-hmm. Communicate, work together. I think that I have friends that are in agriculture that feel geographically but also culturally isolated. And I think that why I'm interested in spending some time in an urban area is connecting, right? Mm-hmm. How can we work together? How can we educate and communicate, whether that's through my Instagram feed of 69,000 followers, which are all over the place, I guess, and connect the struggles and the reality and the sacrifices of the people that are raising animals and growing food, to the people that go to Whole Foods and just pick up the organic produce while they're on their phone and go to their dinner party. In other words, it's not better, worse than. We shouldn't have enemies. We shouldn't judge or try not to, but rather really try to connect all these dots and try to explore the impact of use and tell the stories of where the stuff comes from. You know, I mean.
Yep, that's what you're doing, man. You're playing a big role in that, is telling the story, and I think you're doing an excellent job with it. And I think it's so cool how I just happened upon your work a few years ago, and now here we are talking about this stuff. So thank you so much for your time on this. How can people connect with you online?
My website and my Instagram and email are all I am Stephen Smith at gmail or .com or on Instagram. Reach out. I would love to connect with people, learn more about what everyone's doing, and use whatever, little resources I have to spread the word and try to, do what's best for the West. And Ed, thank you, man. I'm so inspired by all the hard work that you're doing to bring people together and spread the word and raise these issues. And so you're doing a great job, and thank you. I'm so flattered that you took the time to chat with me.
Yeah, well, same here, man. I mean, you're the one doing all the hard work. I just sit here and ask questions.
No.
Well, thanks, man. I really appreciate
it. Likewise.
So there you go, Stephen Smith. Hope you enjoyed that conversation. I sure did. He's a really cool guy who's doing very impressive work that is very important for the future of the American West. It creates that connection between people who may not otherwise be exposed to the West, and I think that connection is what leads to conservation, which is what leads to all of us being able to have a nice life out here. So hope you enjoyed that. Again, go to Stephen's website, check him out on Instagram. I'll have links to all that stuff in the episode notes. Feel free to check it out. Thank you to Stephen for taking the time to do that as you were packing up for your big Mexico motorcycle adventure. Thanks to all you for listening. Again, if you have any ideas for future guests, don't hesitate to reach out. All my contact info is on the Mountain and Prairie webpage. So thanks a lot. I'll talk to you soon.